Right, now you may have seen me messing around with the planer the other week, doing an autopsy on it and getting the motor out. I've not found any source of supply for a replacement that would fit, so this has been sitting in the garage now for a couple of weeks, ready to go up the tip. And I did have one last thought the other day that there is a planer bed and a cutter that might be salvaged. I don't know. This is one of those videos that may or may not ever see the light of day because it may just be a total fail. But I don't need any of, if you like, the machine from there downwards. But if I could just take the pulley off the motor, that would attach to that drive belt so that it would give me the drive up to the wheel itself of the actual cutter. So what I'm going to do is just strip the whole thing down into pieces and see what I'm left with at the end of it and see if any of it works. So first off, get the pulley off the end of the motor itself. I'm not sure whether this is a reverse thread or not. It's actually it's come loose fairly fairly easily. Just I haven't got the right sized spanner for the pulley, but it's a 10mm on the actual shaft. Yeah, it's a reverse thread. So that may be or may not be something I need to do anything with. It's quite a small thread. It probably would be end up getting drilled out and putting a pin through it or something as a drive, but at least I've got that now. From here on in I don't think I need anything to do with the motor at all. But that's it. Now all I'm going to do is just take this thing apart piece by piece and see what I'm left with. So I'll probably just put this on like a time lapse and see what we end up with. Morning's work on, we've got it all taken to pieces. I have to say I hadn't realised quite how complex these things were and how many bits there are in it for 160 quid or whatever. They are remarkably complex and quite well built. I mean, I thought this was all, having taken the cover off and the bottom, I assumed it was all flimsy metal like that. It's actually quite solid. It really is, in probably 1.5 to 2 mil metal. Really hefty stuff. Obviously I don't need most of it if I'm going to get anywhere with what I do want. All I will need in theory is the cutter bar, which I've got. There's a needle bearing race on one end which I've just taped up. There is a sealed bearing on the other end. That goes into a housing which bolts to the side of the casing at one end, and it fits into housing on the other with the other bearing, and into that screws the pulley, which has got the other end of the belt on it. And I've got the other end of that drive, which I could, if I could get that onto a motor, I'm somewhere near. I've got the two beds, which is the clever bit, if you like, that I need. I don't need any of the stuff that was to do with the lift mechanism for the bottom thickness of part. What I'm wondering is whether or not there is any way I can retain the top part of this, because it's got all of the fixings for the cross piece, the actual cutter. It's got all of the fixings for the table moving on that top part. So if I could maybe cut that and either cut it at a level, just having a look and seeing what I've got really. There's the original housing. See, I don't need all that depth. Whether or not I could, don't know, probably not use that, which is quite hefty and useful, but put a different floor in it, which may involve a completely new base at the right distance apart. That would give me something that was low, relatively low, that I could mount a motor in pretty much anywhere and take the belt to it diagonally. That's the thought anyway. We will see, we'll have a think further, and if anything, as I say, we'll probably just get an angle grinder onto these, cut them straight, and then make up a cross floor part for it. I think what I'm going to do is, now I've sort of taken it apart, is to go back to square one and just remount the cutter blade, the tables, and there was a height adjuster for the table with the spring on it there and there. And no, that was rollers on there, so I don't need the rollers. It's just basically the table adjustment I think I need. So I might just try and assemble the two tables and the spinny bit, the actual cutter, in the top part, and then see what I need by way of spacing to put a floor in it. and go on from there. But we'll put this top part together first. Of course, with any luck, I can reuse the on-off switch and box and all that sort of gubbins, and then we can just jump the rest of it. We don't need all the chains and gearing for the feed rollers and height adjuster and all that sort of stuff. We can get rid of all that. That's the result of another hour or two's work. What I've done is put back together all the bits that will make a working planer, with the exception of the motor. I've got a drive belt which came off the original one. I have a pulley which may or may not require some engineering work to fit to any sort of motor I want to fit it to. And really now, either by getting a smaller belt or using that belt, I could mount a motor pretty much anywhere on that radius where it swings, and make myself an operating planer, jointer. Taking the blades out temporarily because it was cutting me to ribbons, but other than that, there's remarkably few pieces. There are the two sides, there's the screw adjuster to get this bed height right, there are a couple of bolts on either side, there's the fence and the two sides. Really all I've got to decide now is what level I cut this at. I was going to use the cross piece which is underneath the bottom part of the thicknesser down here, because it bolts into those cross panels that stick out there, but I think that will just make the whole thing too high, and unnecessarily so. I can actually bring this depth down much less, I think, but as I said, a lot of that will depend on whatever motor I'm using and how I get that running. But I'm quite encouraged that it's I've actually got a functioning planing part there that's held perfectly rigidly at both ends in bearings and will work. It will also need something like that underneath it to protect the blade, because clearly it works when you're thicknessing on the underside, and I really don't want anything exposed that could cause a problem on that. I'm not normally a great fan of messing around with machinery that's not doing what it's intended to do, but in fact in this instance all I'm doing is taking an existing machine with an existing design and just slicing the top off it, and in some minor way adjusting its drive. The actual planer part and everything like that is still exactly as it was intended by the manufacturer. So that should be okay if I can now source, I think it's a 1.5 horsepower motor I need, and we'll have a look and see if we can get something working. I've also got a whole load of other stuff that's junk now. All of this can go. This is all the old thicknesser gubbins. I might keep the front cover and adapt that, which will cover the drive assembly, because that will just bolt onto a pair of studs that run through there. So that may give me an option to just cover all the belts and workings up as well.